Negotiation. So you're probably here for something related to salary negotiation, shockingly, since that's what you signed up for. But I'm curious, just for the panelists' benefit, to kind of get a sense as to what are some of your questions or concerns leaning into this particular topic. So what's your top of mind? And by the way, it may be incredibly basic. That's perfectly fine. It may be incredibly sophisticated. That's perfectly fine. We have a bunch of folks that have a lot of expertise in the space we're going to play in. And as we prepped our call, we realized we're actually probably going to change some of the conversation around salary negotiation to be other issues related to thinking about interviewing and looking for positions and so forth. So we'll probably go a little bit broader than what the actual topic is. But out of curiosity, when you signed up and said, yes, I want to attend this session, what do you want to get out of today's session? Because that'll be helpful because we'll be able to steer the conversation in that direction. Again, not all at once, just kind of once at a time. Yeah. Wait.
So, like, what's the general process? Like, when's the right time to ask for a raise? How much you ask for on the offer?
Right. So, what point even in that process do you even bring up anything related to salary at all? Is that part of your responsibility? Is it part of the employer? When does the process unfold? And then, once it begins to unfold, what does it actually look like? Yeah. How much can you ask for? Right. Good. That's good. What else?
Like, as a new hire, how do you kind of navigate that whole situation, that conversation around salary?
Yeah.
And in particular, like when you have an employer saying to you, give them a history of your salary, even though it's not related to the position that you are actually applying for.
Okay, all right. So you've had a history of employment in a particular direction. You're now shifting your particular employment prospects to a new career, so you're expecting actually a different level of compensation to unfold, and how does that sort of present itself? What else?
General things that you should and should not say in the job.
General things to say and not to say in the course of these conversations. That's great. What else?
There's like conflicting debates on whether or not to bring up salary negotiations on your final interview, whether to do it or not, and so I'm just curious.
So our panelists have a strong point of view on that particular issue. So we will lean in on. The issue is when do you even bring it up, and do you bring it up, and how do you bring it up, and what's that course sort of look like? What else?
As a supervisor, on the other end of it, typically we're doing the salary negotiations for staff with HR, and so how do you navigate that? So if you feel like your staff member deserves more, or you want to advocate for more funding, more salary for them, how do you do that?
Yeah. Welcome. Good to see you. As I'm seeing a lot of my students from the various semesters kind of pop in here. Did you have a question, Mike? For you?
Yeah. So specifically in regards to support function positions, you have your revenue generating positions that always add value to the company if they're doing a great job. But if you're in a support function and you're adding value, how do you kind of negotiate the salary to there?
Yeah. How do you communicate the value? How do you have a conversation about what value you're bringing to the organization? Yeah.
In addition to many things that other people have brought up that I'm interested in too, I'm in an election who's going to be working in the nonprofit field, so I'd like to know how
that process unfolds differently perhaps in a nonprofit setting. And actually so John actually, if you've read bios, John actually has deep expertise in that space, so that's great. Dan.
I have two sons who are both early in their careers and facing potential transitions, so I want to be able to advise them on that.
Yeah, it's a really great question, particularly in light of, I think, what a lot of folks here are kind of thinking about too. Yes?
In larger corporations where you sometimes have, as you said, management and supervisors and HR kind of at odds as far as what an employee should get, how do you as the employee navigate that when you also have corporate policy and timelines? Yeah.
I mean, you're going to be put in some band, right? And within that band, how do you negotiate up or down? And we'll kind of talk about that set of issues also. I can take one more question, otherwise we'll be here letting you ask questions at 11:30 and then calling it a day. So we will at some point we have to move into the panel discussion. Yeah.
When you decide you like an individual and that they're perfect for this position and they negotiate too hard, does that affect how much you like the individual after that?
Yeah. So there's a way. How do you do it in a way that actually makes sense as opposed to actually alienating? So on both sides, what does that look like, right? And this gets back at what's some of the conversation around what does good look like, what are the do's and don'ts sort of along the way. So what I'd like to do begin is to actually just have our panelists introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their background, and I suppose I should even, now that I've thought about this for 30 more seconds, any memory that strikes you related to your Claremont days that kind of stands out related to any of the instruction, people you've met, career things, and so forth. So as you think about your time on campus, one idea that may come to mind. So I feel like I'm putting them on the spot already. But since Dave's kicking us off, the pressure's on him. You guys have a little bit more time to kind of warm up for that cold call. Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, this campus isn't the campus I went to. This is all brand new since I was here. I actually have not been on the campus since 1985. So it is, my memories, first of all, of this school are terrific. I remember having black hair when I was here. And I also remember that my kids were the age, they were younger than my grandkids are now. So I have a number of memories about the school. First of all, my first confession is that my undergraduate degree was in geography. I love geography, by the way. This is not known by many people. The other person who was really important and very successful with a geography degree was Michael Jordan, just so you all know. We don't exactly have the same pay in the past. So I came here, I was with Johnson & Johnson. I came here really in a lot of ways to kind of cover up my geography degree, to be honest with you. For me, coming back to school after having been working for 7, 8, 9 years was fantastic, because what the graduate degree did for me is it made sense, a little more sense anyway, of the business that I was seeing around me. All of a sudden, I was a little bit timid about the accounting and finance classes, to be honest. I aced them. They were great. As a matter of fact, we had a thing where if you didn't get a B or better, you didn't get reimbursed. So I had straight A's at this school. Like, I was like, no way I'm going home and tell my wife that, anyway, I got a C+. So I remember particularly two professors. Peter Drucker was one of my professors. He was a wonderful person to listen to. It had absolutely nothing to do with the class, but you listened and you were thankful that you were able to be in that class. There was another one, I don't think he was part of the school, but he came over and taught. His name was Harv Wickman, and I don't think he's been around for a while, but he was also extremely valuable to me. So anyway, for me, getting the MBA here with Drucker was really, it was what allowed my career to take off. And I only spent about another year here locally before I was transferred to New Jersey for about 5 years. And things changed because of that. So I'm very thankful for the time here. What I do now, I'm vice president for a public company. It's called Endologix. It's a medical device that you hope you never get. It's one if you have an aneurysm in your abdomen, in the aorta. We provide, we manufacture stents that are used to repair that. It's a pretty nice business. I love the business itself. I did work 25 years with Johnson & Johnson, and I've been doing this now for a while too. So that's pretty much it.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Dave. Katie?
Hi, so I've had a fairly traditional career. So when I graduated from Claremont, 9/11 had just happened. So I literally remember one of my memories of being at Claremont was 9/11, and the day we came into class and what VJ said to us. That day of sort of, I don't know really how to start class or whether we do class today. So that's one of my memories. So at the time I graduated, there was pretty much a hiring freeze across the board. And so the one organization or types of organizations that were hiring was defense. And so never in a million years did I think I would go into defense, but I went into defense. And my first boss was literally Maverick from Top Gun. He literally was flying a plane, and he literally did hit the roof, and that's how he ended up in his role. So it was a great experience. From there, I moved to CPG, to Nestle. So both big organizations, right? Big. Northrop Grumman has international, mainly U.S. based though. So 250,000 employees, right? Nestle, the same, 32 billion in revenue. And then from there, decided to do kind of a shift and say, okay, I've done big. what about a lot smaller? And so went to ReadyPack. ReadyPack at the time that I joined was close to bankruptcy. And that's why I went. So most people would probably run in the other direction, but I said, wow, it's a pretty interesting experience to see if we can turn this thing around. It's private equity space, and just on Tuesday, the announcement just came out that after 3 years of work, the company is at 24% growth, and we've just been bought by a French company. So that's sort of my experience. My other memory, I was going to sort of relay off of yours because that's one of my key memories, is I was fortunate enough to also take classes with Drucker. And I do just remember him sitting here with his Krispy Kreme donut, and he just kept talking. And you really had to pay attention because there was a lot of richness in what he was saying. But he was it was story after story. It was really a memorable experience.
Great. Thank you very, very much, Kitty. John?
I'm John Holborn. I began my career in the executive search business without a degree, and thought, well, maybe I better get some education in order to provide some credibility to my clients. So I, like maybe some of you or most of you, went to school at night, earned a couple of bachelor's degrees and a couple of master's degrees, and thought, well, I need some credibility in order to impress my clients. Around 1991, you might recall there was a terrible recession. Executive search was in the toilet, so I went to work for Computer Sciences Corporation, and at that time, they had a tuition reimbursement program which helped to pay for my Drucker School experience, which was great. I was stationed at Jet Propulsion Laboratory and working on some interesting space-based projects, which are real fun, and recruiting folks for that particular industry. From there, I went on to Aerojet, which is now Northrop Grumman here in Azusa. That company split up. They make rocket engines, and they also make satellite systems, defense satellite and weather satellite systems. So again, launching things up in the air and going around and around and around the Earth, that was a lot of fun for a number of years. Then I thought, well, it's maybe time to enjoy a smaller company, much like has been shared previously. So I joined a startup, and we went from $30 million to $130 million in a year and a half, and that was absolutely an amazing experience. You learn so much in that environment. It's just, fasten your seatbelt, hold on, here we go. Sadly, the CEO ran it into the ground, and which oftentimes happens. So I went back to JPL, worked for 2.5 years, and did recruiting for the Mars Exploration Rover project. So in this case, we don't go around the Earth, but we leave the Earth and go to Mars, and that was a blast. So a lot of fun. That project came to a conclusion right around 9/11. That was my last week of working for the laboratory, so I jumped back into executive search again, and I've been doing that for the last 14 years. So it's been a lot of fun. Actually, 17 years, 16 years. Math is not my main subject, right? So my Drucker experience, much like has already been shared with you, what a rich and wonderful opportunity it was to sit under Peter. But you know what? I often find that you learn as much from your instructors as you learn from the people that are sitting to the right and the left of you, right? So in this august body, you have an opportunity to be able to collaborate with your peers and learn from their experience. And if you're not doing that, you're really missing out on the educational experience. I'm sure all of you are. But I think that was the richest opportunity for me to say, you know what, maybe I do fit in with this group. Maybe I'm able to overcome my insecurities of either having a lack of experience or maybe not, being picked first for the baseball team. Okay, so enriching and wonderful experience. Glad to be a part of it, and glad to be here this morning.
Great, thanks, John. So in preparation for this particular conversation around salary negotiation, we actually about 15 minutes ago about 45 minutes ago, started talking about how to frame some of the issues that are here that we wanted to talk about. And Katie, I think you had an interesting perspective when we started thinking about some of the questions here around how do you think about kind of the frame for this issue of moving into a particular employment prospect. So, not so much when does negotiation actually begin or end, but how do we think about this overall issue of employment, and then when exactly someone should be thinking about even mentioning or broaching the topic of compensation.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we're talking about, and I say this to anyone that I interact with right at work and who comes for career advice and things like that, is I think the most important thing that you can do for yourself is know yourself. And know exactly what it is that you love, what you're passionate about, and what's important to you, right? Because there's a lot of elements that go into a job. And it's not just salary, right? It's the person you work for, it's the team you work for, it's the culture of the organization, it's what you're learning, right? The opportunities and things you get exposed to. The business context, I think, is incredibly important. Are you in a growing business? Are you in a cash cow? Are you in a declining business? All of those things, I think, are really important. It's important to think about what's important to you. Flexibility, right? This topic a lot these days. Work location, flexibility, how work gets done, all of those things. So I'd say the first thing is know what's really important to you going into the process, because then that helps sort of guide what do I want to negotiate on or not, based on what truly is actually going to make a difference to you. And then I would say, when we talked about, so the end part of the question is when, right? The big question is when. As late as possible would be my advice, because I think what you want to establish and what any employer is probably looking for, whether it's a small startup or whether it's a big public company or a private equity, they want to know that you're interested in making a difference at their company, right? And that you're interested in the business results that they're trying to drive. And so you want to be focused on that, right? Learning about the company, learning about the product or the service, the culture, the career paths, the things that are going to make a difference kind of day to day in your everyday work.
Great. Dave, thoughts about this notion? One of the things that we talked about was the idea that at some level there's a lot of data that's out there related to the industry, the firm, the organization, the job description you're looking for. So there's actually a set of bounded constraints already there. So if that particular position is, looking to hire at 50 to 60,000, and you ask for 250,000, the odds are probably quite low. And by the way, if you ask for 30,000 when the position is 50 to 60,000, that also suggests you didn't do your homework. So, there's an issue here of how much band do we have to play with here, related to this particular position. That's actually quite important, related to pushing it as far late as possible. The idea is that, and I think, Dave, you mentioned something about, doing your homework, about what's available in the public domain related to this issue, assuming that you're following your passion, assuming you have a position isolated, assuming you know the employer and everything else. We're putting a lot of constraints already upon you as you think about what that might look like. I'm not sure, Dave, if that resonates in terms of kind of thinking about the nature of what the position might be in terms of the actual salary compensation.
Yeah, so John brought up a point when we were talking earlier. There's all kinds of different companies out there. There are small companies, companies that really don't have a lot of infrastructure, and that negotiation process is very different than what I'm about to talk about. I haven't worked for those companies. I have worked for larger companies, and let me just tell you a little bit about those companies. When we are about to hire somebody, we know what that job is worth in our industry. We know what that job is worth with that level of education, those number of years of experience. We know total compensation, which includes bonus if that's part of the offer. So we kind of have our data, and we use that for internal and external purposes. So probably you're not going to make much of a shift on that part of it. And I would just say this: if you get a company that has all that kind of information and they give you a low ball offer, walk away. They will do that to you again and again and again. So you should get a fair offer based on that. And that offer will be based on market data, which, just so you know, many companies participate in that. We share the data. It's collected by companies. We use a company called Radford. And that data is then taken and used for all the salary decisions that we have. So you can be prepared by going to places like salary.com, places like Glassdoor and looking on those sites about what salary those kind of jobs might pay. Just recognize they may not be fully accurate. I think that they are getting better, as was said earlier today. But the issue of your base salary, your base compensation, you shouldn't make that part of the interview process. And I think this is what you said earlier. That doesn't belong in the discussion for the interview. Wait till you get the offer. Somebody told me a long, long time ago, never turn down interviews, turn down offers. And that's really wise. You go through the interview, you wait till you get the salary, you get the full package offer, and at that point, for a very brief moment, you have control. And that control is that they have expressed they want you, they've committed to you, and in many cases, they've actually stopped recruiting because they think they have you. That's the one period of time where you can say, is there any latitude that you could have on whether it's the salary, if you thought it was a little low, or on the bonus program, or on some other benefit? I'll tell you, one of the ones that some companies are flexible on is vacation. You'd be surprised. I don't know if that'll be important to you. It is to a lot of people. But there's a brief moment when they've made the offer and you're talking to usually the person in HR who is extending the offer. That's when you can ask your questions. And they very well may say there's no latitude, that's it. And you're going to have to decide to accept it or not to accept it. But in some cases, there is some latitude. I'll give you an example. Sometimes there will be, we can't really do anything with the base salary, but maybe we could provide a sign-on bonus. That doesn't happen for every company and for every situation, but if you're leaving a company, let's say you're leaving a job and there's a bonus that you're about to be paid. Sometimes companies will do that. They will pay a sign-on bonus. But by and large, you should expect that the offer that you're going to get is based on data. And what they've decided is you fit on this scale right here, and that's an honest offer to you. And if they're not being honest with you, like I said, walk away.
So, John, you're coming at it from the executive search perspective, and actually, just as a foundation, some folks here may not know there is an industry of executive search, so it may be worthwhile to mention what exactly executive search is all about. And then you're coming at it from, you're in some sense the other side at some level. I'm not quite sure how to frame this best, but it'd be great for you A, to kind of give a little bit of background, and B, comment on what we just heard and whether that kind of resonates for you.
Absolutely. All of this resonates very, very deeply. I've had the unique privilege of being on both sides of the desk, being the executive recruiter, but also being a director of HR. So I've had to negotiate and handle and manipulate the numbers in order to make things work for the company, as well as obviously fill the job. And the rub is this: if you have 10 or 20 or 40 or 80 or 120 requisitions on your desk and you need to fill that job, there's a motivation for you to, work with that candidate and try to fill the job. If you have 3 openings on your desk, then you're going to sit a little higher in your chair and maybe try to see if you can save the company some money. Executive search is a business that began probably or legitimized probably in the 50s, late 50s and early 60s, by at that time the Big 8, which are now the Big 4. And of course, many companies wanted to hire people out of those accounting firms because they had great training programs and still do today. So executive search was born in the fashion where I, as a recruiter, will be retained by a firm that has a specific need, and then I become their agent or their headhunter and go out and look specifically for a person who meets a very narrow job description. And that narrow job description could be a technical skill, it could be a functional skill, amongst others. And so my job is to interview maybe somewhere between 75 and 80 people for the job, either on the telephone or through electronic device, and basically build myself a hand of, let's see, I had my hand here somewhere. I lost it. Here it is. I have to kind of build a winning hand. You know, I got to make sure I have enough face cards in my hand that are really unique and interesting people. And those unique and interesting people will definitely bring that process to a heightened pitch where what does it take to get this person on board? And then it's a negotiation, obviously, between the company and the individual to be certain that it's a fair and equitable offer, as we just saw behind us earlier with the other two schools that I previously mentioned, and to make certain that we don't upset the internal equity. But there was a question asked earlier with respect to a revenue-generating job versus a staff job. And a revenue-generating job, you're definitely going to have some greater opportunities to negotiate. And I have a 3-page handout in the back. Please grab one of those because it has some very good information for you that we won't be able to talk about throughout this particular moment in time. But the bottom line for me is, and I may be going to steer a little bit to the left, the bottom line is you've got to convey confidence. You have to convey confidence that you know what you're talking about. You're someone that can work in a difficult situation, and you have to be likable. Nobody wants to hire a jerk. Nobody wants to hire somebody who says, "Well, I've got to have this." That's I'm not going to go to bat for you. The HR person's not going to go to bat for you. And when the hiring official hears from his downline with respect to maybe cocky behavior, then suddenly you're not on the short list anymore. So a lot of these things have to do with how can I say this? Obviously skill, but on a sports team, a basketball team will definitely give for a couple of inches in height for a lot of energy and the ability to make 3-pointers. So I think the whole package has to do with the personality, your likableness, your confidence, your capacity to work, as well as your education, your past experience. So I'll end it with that.
So we've actually covered a lot of territory here. We said push it to the far end, begin negotiation after you sort of have the offer. You may know that you actually have more power than you think you have. There's a full range of things that are not just about the salary, but about bonus, about vacation, about other stuff. There's a lot of data that's online that boxes you in a positive sense as to what that sort of looks like. And then there's the observations about starting off about who am I, what am I passionate about. There's the issue of what are they looking for, and what specifically can I bring related to this notion of that they're trying to hire to fill out a particular position in a team context and so forth. So we actually covered a lot of territory. What I'd like to do at this point is actually begin to kind of toss it back to you, because you came in with a set of questions. A lot of them may have already been answered, actually. I know we haven't got into the back end of what's the give and take related to if we do get the offer and we are in negotiation, what does a good negotiation sort of look like? What's the good, what's the good and bad of kind of what that looks like? So we could go there, but rather than go there, let me just open the floor. You can see here we have an enormous amount of expertise in the room, and this is a very safe environment. In contrast to when it's live and you're negotiating, where you really want to have the headgear on and someone giving you advice real time around what to do, we don't have that, right? So we have a very friendly audience of graduates here who really are here to give back to you and operate in your best interest. So anything can be, this is a safe environment, anything can be asked, right? Anywhere up and down the food chain. Yes, question?
You talked about the importance of the organizational culture, which is not always easy to determine. You do your research, you read as much as you can, and you talk to people, have some informational interviews, but then you go in and you find, for women, it is not a good situation. People are grabbing you, hugging you, whatever, talking to you, meeting you, you find your salaries lower. How can you negotiate through this very unpleasant situation? Maybe you feel you've done your homework, or maybe it's a job like this recent one in the news where it's focused on feminism and the importance of meeting feminine needs, and yet they say the culture was very negative toward the women employees, and they accepted lower salaries because they believed in the identity of this company and its focus.
So, I'm looking at
Katie. I'm going to say I'm the logical one to answer that.
Yeah.
and to give you some context, right? So when I went to Northrop Grumman, every single one of my meetings I was the only female in the room. I started off in a role there in succession planning and talent management for the executive team, which, looking back on it, was incredibly fortunate. I mean, I don't know that people start their career that way, so I had a boss that either was naive or just I was lucky. So I literally spent most of my meetings in meetings with directors and VPs. They were former military, some of them 4-star admirals, 4-star generals, and they all wore the same blue shirt, and they all had the same haircut. And one person did come into the room one day and wore a purple shirt, and we had a whole discussion about talent, and I did have an opportunity to interject. Creativity looks like a purple shirt. But I think that, so the interview process, I think you asked a couple of questions. I think one of your questions is, how do you determine that the culture of the organization is right for you, right? And I think that you want to pay very close attention to who the organization is having you interview with. And you want to make sure that ask the questions about how is the team structured, what team am I going to be on, and if you're not getting an opportunity to meet at least a decent cross-section of those people in the interview process, I would be comfortable to say, hey, I'd love to meet some of the team to really get a feel for, right, how we work together and things like that. Would you be open to having me meet some more of the team so that you can get a better sense of who you're working with, what the culture of the organization is, and things like that. Glassdoor is a controversial space for a lot of employers, and you need to understand, I think, what's posted on Glassdoor. So you're always going to have the extremes, right, on Glassdoor. And then you've got folks in the middle. So you've got the folks that left that are unhappy and darn it, I'm going to get out on Glassdoor, right? And you've got the folks that love it, and either the company has encouraged people to be very transparent on Glassdoor, or they, of their own, right, intuition, want to go and say, this is the best place to work, right, come work here. Then you have sort of in the middle. So you have to read it, but I'll say for Nestle had a change in CEO, and Nestle's Glassdoor prior to the CEO change was fairly positive, and it was very negative after. And it truly was an accurate reflection of the culture and how unhappy people were with the leadership there. So Glassdoor is another source, right, that you can go to and just get out. There's lots of information out there, and just kind of get out there and see what you can find to really assess, is this the right place? Because you don't want to be going, as a female, you don't want to be going to somewhere where harassment is tolerated, right, or anything like that. And then I think the second part of your question, right, was around salary negotiations for women, right? And there's lots of discussion about pay equality, laws now coming out around pay equality and potential mandates on employers down the road around pay equality. And I think what I learned here, candidly, is really still true today. And that's that there tends to be a fundamental difference between how women approach a salary negotiation and how men approach a salary negotiation. And women tend to see it as building a relationship. And men tend to see it, and this is the stereotypes. You got to recognize there's cross-sections, right, across both of these. Not all women are going to see it as a relationship, and not all men are going to see it as a negotiation. But at the end of the day, it isn't. The salary negotiation is not about building a relationship, and I've made that mistake in the past. The best thing that you can do for yourself is to not negotiate with your direct boss. You really want to try to be calling and talking to the recruiter or the HR person, and then have the information funnel that way. Because then you avoid that sort of first day pre-negotiation stuff, right, that happens. In some cases, your direct boss may call and give you the offer. And in other cases, they may not. It might be the HR or the recruiter. And if your direct boss gives you that call, then graciously thank them for the offer. You always want to do that. We've sort of talked about not getting to that phase of that conversation, but always make sure you thank a company for an offer and appreciate that they are interested in you. And then get your buy time, right? So I'd love to kind of make sure that I have all of the data together and evaluate the offer completely and get back to you tomorrow or whenever that is, right? And then you can call, if you are going to negotiate, then you can call the person that really is the better person to talk to.
Yeah, I'd like to answer the question regarding gender equality and inequity. On page 1 of my handout, I have a quote from a Harvard Business Review regarding a study of starting salaries for male MBAs who had recently graduated from Carnegie Mellon. The male salaries were almost $4,000 more, or 7.6% higher than the women's starting salaries. That's because most of the women's had simply accepted the offer, the initial salary offer, when in fact only 7% in this study had attempted to negotiate, whereas 57 of the male counterparts, or 8 times as many men as women, had asked for more. The study was conducted by Linda Babcock. On the following page, I have a graphic which indicates this and demonstrates this to a point where, according to studies, I don't want to get myself in trouble here, but according to studies, men just tend to naturally negotiate more. And in the far right column, you'll see it says, when do you expect to negotiate next? Women say, well, probably within about a month. Men would say, well, I would negotiate within about a week. So the negotiation doesn't stop with a salary offer. It stops with, you want how much to fix my car? You want $700? No, I'm not going to pay you $700. So it has to do with services. It has to do with negotiating prices. It has to do with so many things in just human daily relationships. And so I encourage women to utilize something that you have a tremendous advantage over men, and that is eloquent communication. I think women communicate far more eloquently than men do. Utilize that, express your confidence, negotiate in a manner that is pleasing and is likable. For instance, when someone receives an offer, and you can fire back, very politely. Well, that's an interesting number. How did you come up with that salary number? What does that do to the person who's listening to you? Well, that's an intelligent question. You haven't asked for more. You've asked for what is the process by which you have reached this particular number. And you see I have a number of questions and objections and how to overcome the objections on the page there. For instance, in the signing bonus, you could say, well, I understand that this company, on certain circumstances, provides signing bonuses when they join the company. And the person will say, yes. And they say, well, because I'm unfamiliar with your process, could you walk me through how that works?
Great. Excellent. Thank you, by the way. That was, in fact, data-led, which I love. So let me. I see James over here, kind of getting ready to kind of answer our question. I feel like we're kind of doing some city hall thing where you're going to say your plumbing's not working correctly, and you've got this issue with DPW and whatever the heck it is, the water department. But and I'll let Counselor Dave answer that question for you. But why don't we fire away here and see what you got?
I was just going to ask about, you had talked about some interesting options for negotiation ranging from vacation to sign-in bonus, and I'm just kind of curious if you could walk through some of the things that we don't traditionally think of but that we should when we're going through negotiation.
Great.
Let me just take a quick shot at this. First of all, I just want to go back to the Carnegie Mellon study. It doesn't mean that because they got higher salaries, they got better jobs. So let's start right there. Look long-term at this. There are going to be places where if you get a salary and frankly, it's just not what you expected, you don't think it's fair, you should negotiate, and you should be willing to walk away. On the other hand, you have to have a long-term view of where this is all headed. So let me just try to take as an example when we give sign-on bonuses. When you give sign-on bonuses, typically is in one or two scenarios. One would be the person's walking away from something to come to us. So as I mentioned before, they're with a company and they're going to get a bonus in February, and I'm talking to them in December. That might be a good example of that. Or if a person is going to have to relocate, that's something that you should definitely, that is a negotiable thing, by the way. If the company's going to ask you to relocate, there's a lot of negotiation you can do on that. Sometimes people say, they get pretty cheap and they'll say, we'll give you $5,000 to move to the East Coast or something. That isn't going to cut it, folks. So being able to negotiate on the terms of your relocation, that's something that you could certainly do. I already mentioned vacation. A lot of times the hiring manager has a little bit of discretion on that issue. But the other issue, by the way, for why you might do a sign-on bonus is that you have internal compression. In other words, you have people who are at that salary already, and this is something where you're going to provide them with a sign-on bonus. It won't go to their base salary, but it will give them at least temporary compensation. So what I would encourage you to do is have a long-term view of the opportunity and the job itself. You live with the job. That's what you live with. You may go somewhere else and get, 5% more or something, and you might not be nearly as happy or have the long-term opportunity. But those are a few things that you could negotiate.
Yes, and then the other thing that I would kind of build onto that is a couple of things. So we haven't talked about, the total benefits package, right? So, and depending on what company you're at, your total benefits package could be, up to 40% in addition to, or even sometimes greater. Nestle was a very rich plan. We had a pension plan, we had and a 401k, which was rare, right, at that time, so we had both. And pretty substantial health benefits. So when you looked at total compensation at Nestle, a huge portion was actually in benefits. And pension plans are not things that people can negotiate, right? They're ERISA governed and things like that. But so a comment on sign-on bonuses. So companies will also use, so in the mid-space right now, because I think what you just said is absolutely my experience, right, in the Nestle's and the Northrop Grumman's of the world. In a financial turnaround, sign-on bonuses had another advantage and a lever. And that's that you're very focused on SG&A cost and SG&A growth, right? Because you're trying to grow the business, but you've got to have top-line growth and you've got to control your bottom-line cost. And so sign-on bonuses allowed us to go get talent that we wanted because we wanted top-tier talent with at the same time as being able to be conscious of the total SG&A cost of the business. So it is depending on the organization you're working on, sign-on bonuses can be a real lever, and there was a real range, right? Sign-on bonuses could have been $5,000, they could have been $50,000+, right? It really, depending on the level of job and the circumstances, and to your point, what they were walking away from and what you were trying to buy out. One thing to remember on sign-on bonuses, they're taxed at the flat rate. So you're going to lose 37% of it, roughly. Now, depending on how all your taxes wash out, right, when you do them at the end of the year, you might get some of that back. But the number sounds really great. You say, wow, $5,000, that's great. And you'll see $2,500, right? So.
If I could just add one more I forgot to bring up. If you're going to a public company where they have stock and they're going to give you sign-on stock, that's another area at times you can negotiate too. Usually they'll have guidelines on stock. And oftentimes, if you say, I understand the salary's a little bit low, it's a little less than I was looking, but I'm really interested in the long term with this company. How about could you increase that sign-on equity? That's a perfectly good tack to take.
Yeah, I'm going to go John, then I'm going to field the question. Yeah.
This begs the question that you're not holding these cards when you're interviewing. Okay? If you're holding those cards, accept the offer and move on. But I think the key issue here is the value of the candidate to the company. Now, we have a lot of people that are recent or will be or soon to be and are recent graduates. Be a little more gentle on the reins during the negotiation process. This may be your first or second professional job, and you're really what you're trying to do, in my opinion, as a recruiter, I would tell this to anybody and everybody. You are basically sold on the job or you're not. It's the job. What are you going to learn on that job that's going to make you more valuable 2 years from now? So I'm going to learn something on this job. Maybe it's Ruby on Rails, and if you're into that. And now all of a sudden you've increased your potential salary worth from $70,000 to $90,000 because you understand Ruby on Rails. So if you're learning something, if you're in an industry where you become an industry expert, that's the equity that you want to focus on. Money is money. You're going to spend it, you're going to lose it, maybe you'll invest it, maybe you'll make some, you'll lose some. But the experience that you get in the organization, that's where you want to focus your attention.
One other thing I mentioned, we didn't talk about it, and one of the questions that we had been talking about was the cost of benefits. I actually think in this day and age, the cost of your health benefits, if that's something that you want to take advantage of at a company, is very relevant to and can help you potentially, right, with your overall salary negotiation. And it's also a really good way to get a feel and kind of feel out the company and how open they are to the discussion versus, if they expect you to just not negotiate and accept, right? So my first job offer, if I had negotiated on that, that probably would have been death. It was a Marine, right? It was. I should be nothing but humble and grateful for the offer, and I was fortunate. They gave me a fair offer with phenomenal benefits. But if the healthcare benefits are significantly higher than either you're paying currently, that can be a lever, right, that you can pull. And then what you're framing up there is, I'm interested in your total compensation package, right? I'm not solely focused on the base salary. I'm not solely focused on the bonus. I'm really interested in understanding in total what you're offering me. So you can start to ask questions. Tell me about your medical benefits. How much are my premiums each month? If it's single, if it's married, whatever it is. And you can start to sort of get a read on how are they responsive to that? Are they really open with that? Are they really transparent or not? That might help you get kind of feel them out a little bit.
That's great. Excellent. Let me go to our studio audience then and field our next question here.
Hi. I have 3 questions. Sorry. First of all, whenever I get in a job interview, the first call I usually have is with the HR, and the first question that they ask me is, what is your current salary? What is your current plan? Should I say my actual salary? Should I say 10% above? What should I say? That's question 1. Question 2 is, with regards to the discussions when I get the job offer, let's say currently I'm negotiating my salary with a company, and I have something like a planned 2 weeks vacation. At what point in the negotiation should I mention it? Or I know that, as you said, vacation day is something that sometimes you can move into throughout the negotiation, but sometimes you're kind of stuck because you only get like 2 days, you acquire only 2 days a month or something like that, and you have a planned vacation for next month or something like that because you didn't know you're starting a new job. And my third question is, let's say that, for example, I'm starting a new field and I'm totally overqualified for the job that I'm going for, but on the other hand, I really want that title. It's really important for me. And in that case, I'm coming with a specific salary with X, but the salary that I usually come in for that specific role is X minus Y. So what do I do in this case? Because if I'll tell them, would I tell them my current salary, or what would be the best negotiation-wise to do? So those are my questions.
Great.
Thank you.
So it's a 3-part question. It feels like we're taking an essay now in the and saying make sure. And there's 10 points for each correct answer for these. All right. So when folks ask what is your current salary, and you're applying, I think, to a position that's more significant than that, what's the best way to handle that sort of conversation? Whoever wants to volunteer.
So I would tell you that most companies, there's some small companies that don't, but most companies are going to do a background check, and that background check is going to include a salary check, and they're going to find out what your real salary is. So you don't want to lie, because that will potentially end up in a rescinded offer. But I think that when you get asked that, and yes, it can be a common question for HR, and the reason, just so you kind of understand, the reason why they might be asking those questions is so that they don't spend a lot of time with a candidate whose cost is way out of the ballpark of what they know the company can afford, or right, vice versa. So it gives them a benchmark. I think you are in a little bit of a slightly different scenario than, say, someone who is currently full-time, and some of you may be full-time in the workforce. But if you're not full-time in the workforce right now and then going back into the workforce, you can say what your salary is, but then if you're I've lost where the person walked back to. Thank you. If you're trying to make some kind of a transition into a different career, right, or a different path, you want to say that as well, right? That look, this is my past salary, but I recognize I now have my MBA, right? Kind of want to emphasize the value of that, and I'm looking to make a career change, and I'm looking for a fair compensation offer relative to the position that we're talking about today, right? So my past, I don't see my past salary as actually as relevant now, right, as it may have been in the past.
That's great advice. Our second question was, you've already got vacation plans scheduled, 3 months out or 6 months out even, and they're looking for a position today, but 6 months out, you got a 1 month vacation to hike, Machu Picchu or something, I'm making it more dramatic because if it's 3 days, they're going to give it to you. So you got this 1 month, hiking plan here, 6 months out. What point in that whole process do you bring that up?
That's not uncommon to happen. And if we really want that employee, we will probably take them anyway. I would say there's, I wouldn't lie about it, but it sounds a lot better if I have a planned trip to another country to visit family or something like that, rather than a recreational kind of trip.
So the Vegas, all out, blowout party for 6 days.
I have personal business in, But I would say that there's two things on that one. The first one was, if they want you, they'll probably do that. The second part of it is, they may ask, or they may require that be unpaid. So just understand, they may say, we'll put you on a temporary leave while you're on that, because they don't feel that granting that is something that's fair to the rest of their employees. But I would tell you that we've many, many times had people say, hey, I already have this plan with my family, and and they always say the tickets are non-refundable. so that's what I would recommend. And I wouldn't necessarily offer that you're willing to do it without pay, but they may offer that to you, and that's a perfectly legitimate thing to ask.
Another way they may get at it is it may be paid, but they'll have you borrow from your accrual. So depending on how the company structures, some companies just give you a bank up front every year. Some companies you accrue, right, every pay period or things like that. They may say, yep, totally go. It'll just come, right, you'll run negative for a while, but you'll make it up over time. It's another way to do it. In terms of the timing, do you guys still do the negotiations class here as part of the?
It's very funny timing, because there's Dana in the back row who's actually trying to get this into the curriculum as soon as possible, a negogitions class.
Well, it was one of the best classes I ever did.
There you go, Dana.
It was great.
It's on video.
I remember this technique that we learned in that class. It was called the salami. And the salami is about, don't put it all in at once, right? Phase it in over time. And something like this is probably an easy message, and sort of my advice, to slip in right at the end. Right when they think that they've got you, slip it right in at the end.
Whoever's making the offer.
Yeah. I mean, I encourage you guys to try to not negotiate with your managers. I think it can be easy the other way. But it also depends on the organization structure and how strong the HR organization is. In some organizations, the managers make the decisions, and HR doesn't play a huge control role in terms of what pay and offers are. And in other organizations, it's really ultimately HR is making the decisions and not the manager.
And your last question, I'm not sure if I understand it correctly. It was that there was a particular job title that was very important that you wanted to have on your resume as part of this notion of a career progression. But the compensation for that was less than what you wanted, or was it more than you used X versus minus Y as the?
You work today as a software engineer, you want to become a product manager. For example, a product manager and a beginner, a junior product manager would make less than an experienced software engineer. On the other hand, you do want to move to that role, and you have to start somewhere.
Got it.
Okay. So the pay would be lower.
Yeah, good. It's a great question. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's tough when you're making a career transition, unless you're already in a company and you can make that career transition with a company, then you have more opportunity where they might say, yeah, we believe you could add great value in this area. We're going to grandfather your pay and things like that. Most companies are going to want to pay for the work that's done. And that goes back to the salary surveys and things like that. So most of them are going to look at what's the job that we're actually offering you, and what do you bring to the table. Now, you may have some, as a software engineer, you may be able to bring a little bit more to the table than someone else. So you may be able to push your pay a little bit higher in that range of the pay. But at the end of the day, they're not going to, if it's a $20,000 gap, they're probably not going to grandfather you if you're just walking right into the company.
We have another question.
Yeah, hi. My question has to do with John's bottom line. However, I would love to hear from the rest of you. John, you mentioned 4 elements at least that I captured: personality, education, likableness, and capacity. And so I read somewhere once that we have about 2 minutes maybe to create a really positive first impression. And so I was wondering if maybe you can elaborate a little bit more, especially that whole really pesky point of personality. Maybe give some examples, whatever comes to mind.
That goes along the line with likableness, and I think maybe a good metaphor is recruiting and interviewing is a lot like dating. And how likable are you? And you don't want to go too far in the first date, and you want to maintain an aura of delightfulness, and you're a pleasant person. Smile, engage, eye contact. Somebody may mention an interesting point in the interview. I know that's a fascinating point. Can I add something to that in the discussion? So that way they feel engagement, that you're not just sitting there listening and answering questions, yes, no, maybe, but you're really involved in the process. And the interviewer will feel that, especially in a lot of my work where the interview's over the phone. And I prefer not to use Skype because oftentimes Skype will offer a lot of visual distractions that will keep you from being able to focus on what that person is saying, their word choice, their sentence structure. Maybe they add a little humor like I do. That enhances your engagement with your audience, whether it's one person or whether you're on a panel interview. Oh, those suck. I mean, you're on a panel interview with 8 or 10 people, and you're sitting in a boardroom, and they're just firing questions one right after another. And you're okay. I feel like I need to get my catcher's mitt on. Which one should I answer first? The room starts laughing, and so engagement, I think, is important. Developing your personality is important. There was one other piece that I'm missing in your question. Does that answer your question?
Sort of. Yes, I was just caught on that likableness.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it is subjective, but yet it's something that we can all practice and we can all engage in. I have so often, I can't tell you how many times, I have found people, I send them on an interview and I say, this is a really fascinating person. I love fascinating people. They don't really have what you need, but it's such an interesting individual. Would you mind interviewing them based on my recommendation? And if I've made a mistake, just forget my phone number. And they interview them and they go, my gosh, this was a wonderful person. Yeah, in fact, we're going to make them an offer today. And we're going to train them because they fit right in with our team. So likableness can be a huge, huge component between the first interview, the second interview, and the job offer.
It might be kind of interesting for you and I to talk about what we look for, right, in that first interview and how we approach it, because that might help to answer your question. And typically, when you start an interview, right, hopefully the person doesn't forget to give you an overview of the company and the position. Sometimes that happens. And then they're probably going to walk into, so tell me a little bit about, they're going to do some kind of warm-up question, right? And then if they use behavioral-based interviewing, they're going to go into very specific targeted questions to try to understand your skills and abilities in certain areas that they think are important, right, in the role. And I think that sort of open-ended warm-up question and how you answer it for me, is very important because I literally, and there's different interviews. I'd love to make YouTube videos of some of these because it would be hysterical. There are literally times where I've had an hour interview. I've asked, so tell me a little bit about your career, especially in HR, right, or whatever job we're interviewing, and why you've moved to some of those roles. And just walk me through your thought process and how you've done that. And I've put the phone on mute, and it's going an hour later, and I've said nothing, and they've never bothered to check in to see if I'm still there. And that's sort of an automatic, okay, this is not going to work out. So really thinking through and knowing kind of what skills and experience you have and structuring those in a really concise way, and also relative to what you're interviewing for, right? So when I was in this job, I did this. This is pretty relevant for what I think we're talking about today, and then I moved here, there, etc.
So I've interviewed so many people in my life that it really is sickening. I can't even begin to think of how many people I've talked to. There were times earlier in my career where I had so many people to interview that I would forget what the job was I was interviewing them for in the middle of the interview. But here's a couple of points. I agree with what was said about the likability. Number one, you know what? Likability, it starts with the way you greet the receptionist. And it continues in the way that you greet people and thank people for when they offer you water or coffee. And by the way, if they offer you water or coffee, feel free to take it, Actually, I find I still have a hard time doing an interview without a cup of coffee. And often, if you want to have coffee, fine. If you don't want it, that's fine too, but feel free to take it. Let me just say one thing that I look for, and this isn't so much for entry-level people as much as it is for people who have had some experience. Maybe they've had a job before. Maybe they had a job and they went to Claremont Graduate School afterwards. I listen for what did you learn. That to me, let me tell you folks, there's a lot of people who go through life, they have all kinds of experience, they don't learn anything. What did you learn? I mean, I'm looking for a person who's reflective, who can say, yeah, I went through this, and here's what came out of that for me, and how I see my role or my contribution differently. And you should go in thinking, when you look at your own background, like when I worked at that company, what was it that I took away from that company? When I went back to grad school, what was it that changed the way I viewed business? I listen for that. That to me is wisdom, and this is the kind of person that will learn as they go through. We all make mistakes, but this is the kind of person who will learn from their mistakes. So be thinking always, like, what is it that I can share that was the wisdom I got out of that experience? That's a big part of it.
And to piggyback on that, because I absolutely agree with you, the results, right? What were the tangible results? A lot of people can talk about what they did, but they often forget in an interview to say what was the outcome, right? What was the impact on the organization, or what was delivered, or what was improved, or whatever the relevant way to explain what the results were.
Yeah, and just to what Katie said earlier about the person going on and on, I've had that happen many times. Here's the deal. Answer the question and be quiet. And sometimes recruiters are smart enough to know that silence is a very powerful tool. You will tell that if you use silence, people feel like they got to fill it up, and they'll say things they probably shouldn't. And so, answer the question, give the data that you need to give, and be quiet and let the person move on to their next question. Here's another point. When they bring you in for an interview, I agree to a degree with the dating analogy. They actually want to like you. They need to like you because they need to fill a job. And so they're actually looking, whenever they're screening resumes, they're just trying to get rid of resumes, right? But when they bring you in for an interview, they want to like you. And so help them.
Yeah. Piece I want to put on here. Had an opportunity to have a discussion with Tony Shea of Zappos, and I learned something very interesting about his company. And that is, when you fly in to interview with them, you're picked up by a van driver who then takes you to the company campus. You sign in with an individual behind a desk. You then go to a waiting area. You then meet a recruiter, and then you go through the various cycle of interviews and so on. And the van driver drops you off at the end of the day at the airport, McLaren, I guess it is, in Las Vegas. And you fly to wherever your final destination is. At the end of the day, the recruiter talks to the van driver. What did you think about that guy? You know, oh yeah, he was really a schmuck. You know, he gave me kind of a dirty look. Yeah. They do this, okay? So being polite and being likable and being kind and generous with your personality will take you a long, long way.
So we have another question coming here. One small thing that I would encourage you to do relates to what did I learn here, is to develop a point of view in a discipline that you know. So in my discipline in marketing, if someone says to me, hey, Bernie, what's happening in the field of marketing? I will say there are 5 major things unfolding right now. And all of those things have to have number one is they're data-led. I'm not making this crap up. They're data-led. There's a story behind it. Number 2 is there's some aha moment. And an aha moment is typically one that challenges conventional wisdom. So, you know, if I say, listen, I get the idea that everybody's investing in social media. I get the idea that we're seeing a huge shift in movement from traditional media to social media. I don't think that's the right way to frame the problem. I think the right way to frame it is this, which relates to my third point, which is you want to be interesting. So this, in addition to likable, you want to be interesting. Here's someone who's spent, so if I'm telling you, here's my point of view on social media, here's my point of view on management consulting, here's my point of view on pricing. The fact that I have a point of view means I actually put some time into thinking about my point of view. So it's not something I've told the first time. This is the 37th time I've given this speech. And by the time I've given it 37 times, it's much better than the time I gave it the 3rd time. If you're interviewing for a job for whatever the heck the topic is, and you come in and you have a strong point of view of what you think that position should look like, now you're a really interesting candidate. They may disagree with you. That's perfectly fine. But you're now interesting. So you've got the interesting plus likability quotient in the classic 2x2 diagram. I'm going to, I'll go ahead.
Those are my favorite interviews. When I get to learn something out of that 45 minutes, and we get to drill into that, those are some of my favorite interviews.
And it's very funny. I had one of my students about 3 years ago. I said, she was going to interview for a social media job, and I said, you have to have a point of view. I said, and I kind of drilled this into her. And she said, well, that's really helpful. She goes to the interview on Tuesday. She has an offer on Wednesday. She comes back to my class on Thursday. She's saying, hey, I just got this great offer. I'm like, wow, this works. Hey, you know, kind of check, right? You know, so you need to develop this over time. A good place to begin to think about point of view, if you go to Jeff Immelt, CEO of GE. In 2010, he gave this speech at Stanford Business School. The first 4.5 minutes are his point of view around what does he think the external trends that are unfolding in GE's environment are going to look like for the next 5 to 7 years. Now, you might say to yourself, hey, if I'm Jeff Immelt, I don't need to, got it, But the point is, I'm trying to give you a flavor of what a good one would look like. And I get the idea it's operating at the CEO level, but it's something that you need to encourage yourself about as you think about, and by the way, you can have that as a person who just finishes their MBA and has studied finance, I mean, this should not be ridiculously difficult for you to come up with something like that. And you can test it with your friends. Do I sound interesting after? So, okay.
Can I jump on the back of that for just a minute? I had the unusual opportunity to spend 10 minutes with Jack Welch 8 months ago. And I asked him in a forum similar to this, a little larger, I said, what do you look for, typical recruiter question, what do you look for when you're hiring your executive vice presidents at the highest level within General Electric? And I was astonished at what he said. He said, John, the first thing I look for is generosity. He said, the second thing I look for is transparency. Now, if that's one of the greatest business leaders that America has ever produced, is looking for those 2 intangible qualities, then I think we can factor those and develop those into our personality and who we are and how we react to the outside world.
One point around learning, actually, because so Immelt was asked the question of his successor, how did you become CEO of GE? And if you recall at the time, there was a 3-horse race of very talented people. And what he said was, I think the board and others thought I could learn faster than the others. And so the ability to learn, which is Dave, this is your point that you're hammering in on, you got to be asking yourself in that very first job, what am I going to learn? If I'm here right now, if I'm here for 2 years, can I get to this level? And then all of a sudden the chess match kind of opens up a little bit because you've got more room on the board. You then push to the next level. So you're playing this chess match, and you're basically making these moves where the moves are to learn and develop competencies and capabilities and to move yourself along the board. And you've got much more optionality 2 or 3 moves out if you've learned correctly. And it feels like we're leaning into the compensation, but this gets back at what's the overall package sort of look like, and how much am I learning and developing myself along the way. And I know it's easy for us to say that, it's easy for me to say it at the other arc, at the other end of the career stage that I'm at. But I mean, it is something that you need to disproportionately think about. And I know it's a little silly to say it, but I think it is very, very important. All right, I know we have 11 more minutes. We have a gentleman here who's been waiting here for an hour and a half to ask a question. He's got tickets, to like a major athletic event, and he's been outside in a tent. It's March Madness. He's been outside for 3 months waiting to ask this particular question.
Thank you,
So,
guys.
yes.
Thank you all for being here. My name is Eli. I am a first-year MBA student, and I want to, in all humility, share an example of when I was successful in getting some more money. And then I want to ask a question of all of you. When I received my offer to come here, it came with a fellowship. And I knew I wanted more money, but I wasn't going to say, hey, can you just give me more money because I want more money. I talked about how a few months before that, I came to an event here and I connected with the keynote speaker, and I eventually asked him to be my mentor, and how I thought we might be able to do some cool things, at the school. I was successful in getting some more money, and I'm wondering if you can share with us some examples of when new hires have given you compelling reasons to offer them more money.
One that I wanted to mention is an MBA at the Drucker School is a huge investment. So what distinguishes you, who have paid 6 figures, from the guy down the street who got his MBA for $20,000? And that would be a very worthwhile differentiator. So I would say, okay, what other differentiators can you bring up in the discussion? And of course, this is in the context of a job situation over and above an academic situation. But there are tons of differentiators that each of you have in this room that you need to leverage those in order to increase your pay. And I've written some of these down on my list here, but another would be if you finished your program, to say, I have some pretty hefty student loans, and is there a program here at this institution that will allow me to take advantage of kind of a reverse tuition payment program where I've already completed that, or is there an opportunity for an increase based on the fact that I'm carrying a pretty heavy load of debt? There are 101 different, I think, questions that you can ask in a delightful manner that people will think about and will respond to, hopefully, reasonably. So it's, the world is your oyster, and I'm highly, just a very strong believer to say, you need to script these things out. You need to sit down at a desk in a quiet place and just write out your script of your questions. Does it sound good? Work with other people to say, hey, if I ask this question, how could I improve my phraseology, my wording of this question so it sounds delightful, it sounds likable, it sounds reasonable, and will ultimately, hopefully, bring me to a place of compliance. I think that's extremely important. The Drucker School experience for me is a badge of honor. Boy, I got that on my resume like, none other. And I've used it to negotiate for higher salary. A little trick that I used, they asked me what my last compensation was when I joined NASA, and I didn't write my salary down because I was a consultant at the time. So I wrote $65 an hour. Oh, you earned $65 an hour? Yes, I did. So I got a $125,000 offer. 1998. That was fun.
So I know we have, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do one more question, All right? And then I'm going to allow the panelists to kind of reflect upon if if it's your last chance to give wisdom to the crowd. And you want to make sure, man, I'm going to leave here. I better just say this one or two things and make sure they get it, because this is my last chance to kind of, close out something. So I'm going to allow you a kind of a final statement. But let's take one more question and run with it, and then we'll come back to that.
So I wanted to share one thing and then a question. So something that I didn't get until 15 years into my career that might be common knowledge, but it wasn't to me. Make a brag book about the accomplishments that you have, the projects you've worked on, if you're a graphic designer, the designs that you've made, the research you've done, and make sure that that's a physical, tangible thing that you can give to people so that they can see the value of what you do and they can hold on to it. Because it looks a lot different than to hand them, a piece of paper that's your resume that says it on there. They can actually see the quality of what you've done. And my question